A few weeks ago, I was looking for new projects to start, and one idea that was calling to me at the time was participating in a game jam. I had never participated in a game jam before, mainly because in the past I thought that the time constraints might be too stressful and that it wouldn't end up being an enjoyable experience for me. But I was recently reconsidering this because I had seen one of my busier game dev friends still find the time to participate in a game jam. So I was intrigued, but I still wasn't sure what game jam to participate in. The one thing I knew for sure though was that whatever game jam I chose, it would be on the longer side. And then, well, I proceeded to join a 3-day game jam. The game jam I ended up going with was ScoreSpace number 18. The reason why I went with this game jam was quite simple, really. It was on the front page of itch.io, and it said that my game would be played by streamers if it won. Plus, any game that participated in the jam could possibly receive an offer by ScoreSpace to get their game published on the mobile app store, which, was an extra little bonus. The other quirk with ScoreSpace was that all the games that participated in the jam needed to implement a leaderboard of some kind, so that the streamers could compete in the games that won, which I also thought was pretty cool, and I thought it might be quite interesting to try to add. Even though the game jam was only 3 days in length, I still figured that I would have enough time to finish something in the 3 days. Plus, the 3 days were over the weekend, so I should be mostly free. I mean, what could go wrong, right? Immediately, everything went wrong, and it was entirely my fault. You see, the game jam got started on a Friday at noon my time, and so I should have had that entire afternoon going into the evening to work on my game. But you see, I completely neglected to check my schedule when I signed up for this game jam. So, turns out one of my friends had a birthday party that afternoon. And so that entire first day, I wasn't even able to create the Unity project. So, great start to the 3-day game jam. Now, that doesn't mean the day was all bad, because at the very least I was able to brainstorm an idea for my game based on the theme that was announced at noon that day when the jam started. The theme was magnetism. So I basically had that entire afternoon to come up with a theme relating to magnetism. I even asked some of my friends for some ideas, although by the time the party actually happened, I had already come up with what, in my opinion, is quite a good idea. So, the saying, never bring a knife to a gunfight? Well, the idea for this game is that you brought a magnet instead. The game would be a top-down, beat-em-up style game where hordes of enemies would come at you, and your goal would be to kill as many as you can before they kill you. The main appeal would be using your magnet to attract knives, bullets, and guns from your enemies, and then repel them back at the enemies to kill them. I hadn't decided on an art style yet, but I was originally thinking it would be a 2D game, since that would work well with the top-down nature of this game. Of course, because of the party, I couldn't actually work on the game until this was the day where I actually got started creating the game. I created the Unity project, and, well, I actually ended up deciding to make the game 3D instead of 2D. In the end, it was basically just because I don't really know how to do 2D pixel art, and I do at least somewhat know how to make 3D models, and so I decided to make it a 3D project in Unity. Once I actually got the project open, I started by creating a sphere to be our player, because let's be real, beans are overused. Then, I got started creating the movement of your main character. I wanted it to feel quick and responsive, so I made it such that you could change your movement direction instantly, which felt really nice and was much easier to code. You could control your character with WASD and aim your magnet with the mouse. Of course, the magnet didn't do anything yet, so that's what I worked on next. The magnet would be able to attract metal objects with right-click and repel with left-click. But that alone didn't feel like enough, because then it required you to continuously hold right-click to continuously hold objects until you decide to throw it at your enemies. So instead, I made it so that you could just automatically hold objects with your magnet if you brought them close enough. Of course, you couldn't just hold infinitely many objects this way, so I made a limit on how many objects you could carry. You might be thinking I just made it so that you could only carry one object at a time, but nope. Instead, I kinda made it needlessly complicated. Your magnet had a maximum holding weight of 3 units. A bullet was 1 unit, a knife was 2, and a gun was 3. If you held the maximum weight, you could no longer attract any more objects until you repelled the items you were already holding. At the time, I really liked this system, because it meant that you could hold 3 bullets at once and shoot them one after the other like a rapid-fire gun. But in hindsight, it was also probably a little bit too confusing to the user. Of course, the player at this point didn't have anything to attract, or do at all, really. The player was just a sphere, and the level was just a flat plane. I decided that the camera would be stationary and that the enemies would come from off-screen, mainly because that was easier, but also because I felt like it fit better with the rest of the game. The main focus wasn't on navigating the level, it should be on navigating around the enemies. Speaking of enemies, that's what I added next. I first added the gun enemy, which shot bullets every few seconds. The enemies also had different movement states, which were randomly picked every few seconds as well. This gave the effect that enemies were actually kind of intelligent, when in reality they were just big dumb. There were 2 ways to kill these dumb enemies. One was to take their bullets and shoot them back at them, and the other way was to take their gun and throw that back at them. Now, it might seem a bit OP that you could just take the enemy's weapon, but in reality, it wasn't really. You see, you had to be magnetizing their gun constantly for about 2 seconds in order to take it, and keep in mind that they're shooting you during this time. And once you actually took their gun, they would try to run away, and would prevent you from getting points if they got away. So it actually was a bit of a risk taking their gun, because it meant that you wouldn't get as many points. Of course, right now, points weren't even implemented, and I didn't have time to implement them until... This was basically the final day of the jam. Technically, it ended at noon the next day, but I knew that I would only use that morning to publish the game to itch.io. So I worked hard to make sure that the game was complete by the end of this day. First, I added the score, which, is a pretty crucial aspect of the game, since the 2 requirements of this game jam was to 1. Match the magnetism theme, and 2. Implement a scoreboard. And of course, to implement a scoreboard, you need, scores. The scoring system was about as simple as you could get. 100 points for killing guys, and that was it. I thought about adding a combo system, but there was so much left to add and so little time that it just went by the wayside. Then I added a second and last enemy type, Knife Guy. This wasn't very difficult to add either, as this enemy was pretty much identical to the first enemy, other than the fact that instead of shooting, this guy would move in close to stab you. Although, I also made it so that sometimes the guy would decide to throw the knife, which was pretty fun to add. Then, it was time to finally step away from gameplay stuff and create the sound effects, music, menus, and models for the game. The sound effects I created using this website, which is a very nice online tool for creating 8-bit sounds. I would highly recommend it for any people making games for game jams or really anything else. The music was also really easy because I happen to have a rather talented brother who's into music, and he created these 2 sick tracks for my game in a day. The first one has been playing in the background of this video, and the second one is this one. You can check out his YouTube channel where those songs are uploaded, and his other music on Spotify in the description. Next thing was the menus, which were actually really fun to make. One thing I added to complement the sick music was a little intro sequence, which I'm glad I did add, as I got a few compliments about it in the comments when I finally released my game. And I also added the leaderboard at this stage using Loot Locker, which went surprisingly smoothly. And to clarify, this leaderboard was an online leaderboard. It wasn't exactly a requirement that the leaderboard had to be online when you submitted the game for the jam, but the games that won and were played by the Twitch streamers would have a online leaderboard so that, the Twitch streamers could compete with each other. So I just went ahead and implemented an online leaderboard directly with Loot Locker. Last thing I added was the 3D models. I created a gun, knife, and magnet, some stuff for the environment, and some stuff for the guys to wear. And that was it. Or at least all I had time for that day, which only left... This day really didn't have a whole lot going on. Mainly, it involved fixing a few bugs and issues from the previous days, and releasing the game on itch.io. This was the first time I had made a web game in Unity, and the first time I was publishing any game to itch.io. I was quite happy to have it go smoothly. Overall, I was really happy with how the game turned out. I honestly wasn't sure if I was going to get a nice final product to submit in time, but not only did I get that done, but I was actually pretty proud of it. However, the Game Jam still wasn't done. The next stage of the Game Jam involved the game dev participants rating each other's games. And surprisingly, this was actually one of my favorite parts of the entire jam. I had a lot of fun playing all the different games people made, and I also really enjoyed giving thoughtful reviews on people's games, which doubled as a tactic to get more people to play and rate my game. In the end, my game ended up being the 7th most rated game in the entire jam, and ended up placing 8th out of 126 submissions, which is far better than I thought I would do, especially considering this was my first jam. If you want to play the game for yourself, I'll have a link in the description to the itch.io page. You can even try to beat my high score on the global leaderboard, although during the course of the entire jam, my top spot was only taken once, and I took it back immediately afterwards, which is where the leaderboard stands currently, so don't think it'll be easy. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button down below, it helps more than you know, and if you want to see more videos like this one, subscribe, it's free and you can always change your mind later. I'll see you in the next video, bye!